Hello everybody, welcome to this instruction video. This video is for part 2 of the TLC blanket. In part 2 you're going to be learning to combine stitches that you learned in part 1 to make a new pattern. If you look at your blanket, this here is part 2, so this bit here. And what you're going to be learning is how to work single crochets and chain stitches and how to combine them to a pattern. The stitch that we're working is called a moss stitch or a linen stitch. People call it by different names. And the nice thing is you notice that these stitches here look different to those stitches there. But actually they're the same stitches. The only difference is the way that we're using color and how we're working either one row or two rows in the same color. And that gives you a totally different look. That's also very nice about crochet. Just by playing with colors you can get different effects. And color is actually a vital part of any design to give you the look and feel that you're going for. So we'll be learning these stitches, moss stitch or linen stitch in part 2. I'm of course still using Scheepjes Chunky Monkey yarn. It's a nice thick yarn, perfect for this blanket, works up fast. And what you also need are hook sizes. Now, this week we're using two different hooks, a 6.5mm hook and a 5mm hook. So these are the same hooks from last week, but we're going to be using both of them this week as well. I'll take you through all the rows that make up part 2. I hope it's a useful video for you. Thank you for watching. Row 14, you have the right side of your work facing and you're going to go up to your larger hook size, the 6.5mm hook. You need that one for this part. And the color yarn for row 14 is color F from your kit. Going to start by attaching the yarn with a slip stitch in the first stitch of the previous row. Now this hook is slightly larger, so you might have to just wiggle your hook a bit to get it into the stitches, and then attach your yarn with the slip stitch. There we go. Chain 1, which again does not count as a stitch. So in the same position we work one single crochet. There we go. Then, now we're going to start a repeat unit. That means we're going to be doing a number of stitches until we're to the other side. Or a certain number of times depending on the pattern, but in this case till we're to the end. The repeat is actually very simple. Two stitches, chain 1, and then you skip one stitch in the row below, so skipping this stitch, then go to the next stitch, so skipping that stitch, go to the next, insert your hook in there and work a single crochet. So those two stitches, the chain 1 and the single crochet, that is your repeat. You're going to repeat that till you're to the other side. So again, chain 1, skip this stitch, then come to the next, insert your hook and work a single crochet. Chain 1, skip a stitch and work a single crochet. Chain 1, skip a stitch and work a single crochet. You can see how you're creating a small pattern, and that's exactly what we're doing in this part. We're starting to create patterns because crochet is all about patterns and color and texture. So repeat chain 1, one single crochet. After skipping a stitch, repeat this until you're to the other side. I'll show you the last few stitches as well, so now I'll make a jump in the video, but continue this chain 1, skip a stitch and one single crochet till you're to the other side. Almost to the other side, I have a few more stitches to do, or a few more repeats. Chain 1, then we skip a stitch, so you're going to skip this stitch and then come to that stitch, work a single, chain 1, skip a stitch, work a single, chain 1, oh, let me just grab my yarn, there we go, skip a stitch, and if all went well, your next stitch should be your last stitch. And then this here is your last stitch going to work in there. You've got the chain, that turning chain, you're going to ignore that. So your last stitch should fall in the very last position. Complete row 14. You can cut your yarn, and open up your loop to fasten off. That's row 14, and then turn your work for row 15. Row 15, you have the wrong side of your work facing, and you need a new color yarn. This is color D from your kit. I'm going to again attach with a slip stitch in the first stitch. So that's this single crochet in there. So attach your yarn with a slip stitch. We've done this many times, so I think you should have the hang of this by now. And just pull your yarn tails tight. Chain 1. This does not count as a stitch. So in the same position, work a single crochet. Now we're going to start a small repeat unit again. Here you have a chain 1 space. There. In that space, going to work a single crochet. So insert your hook into the space, pick up your yarn, and then complete the single crochet. And chain 1, and then skip the single crochet here. This is your repeat. Going to do this until you're to the other side, and then you'll have one stitch left. So I'll show you again. Single crochet in this space, and chain 1, and skipping the single crochet. Single crochet in the space, chain 1, and skip the stitch. So a single crochet in all the spaces, chain 1's in between. That's what it comes down to. And you're going to repeat this until you're to the other side. And of course you're going to end the row slightly different than the previous row, so I'll show you that as well. For now, work a single crochet in the chain 1 space, chain 1, and skip the single, and continue until you're to the other side. You can really see how your stitch pattern is taking shape. Almost to the end. I'd like to show you the last few stitches. So you're going to repeat the stitch pattern. So that's the single crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch until you'll have 2 stitches left. So this is my last repeat. Single crochet in the chain 1 space, chain 1, and skipping that single crochet. Now you have 2 stitches left. You have the chain 1 space, and you have 1 single crochet here at the end. So in the chain 1 space, work a single crochet, and on this very last single you work another single, and there we go. And then of course there's a chain 1 there that you're just going to ignore. That's the, oh, I've got my stitch, yeah, my stitch mark here at the right side was just standing upright. That is the end of the row. You can cut your yarn. and fasten off. There we go. That's row 15, and you can really see a stitch pattern forming. Turn your work for the front side facing. Row 16, you have the right side facing, new color yarn. This is color B from your kit. I'm going to attach in the first stitch with a slip stitch. There we go. And then of course pulling all my yarn tails, and then chain 1. This chain 1 does not count as a stitch, so in the very first position we're currently at work a single. There we go. Now we're ready to start the repeat unit again. And this is actually very similar to 2 rows down to what was here in the dark red. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, that's the single, and then come to the chain 1 space, and in that space work a single. This is your repeat. You're going to do this until you're to the end. You'll have 1 stitch left, and in there you'll work the last single. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, and come to the chain space and work a single in there. Chain 1, skip a stitch, and work a single. Chain 1, skip a stitch, and a single in the chain space. You can really see the rhythm here. And continue this until you're to the other side. I'll show you the last few stitches of this row as well. But the idea is a single crochet in every chain space and chain 1 in between. Almost at the end of the row, you're going to repeat your stitches until the end. I'm hoping you're starting to see the rhythm here. This is the last repeat. Single crochet in the chain 1 space, chain 1. You're going to skip this single crochet, and then you're going to have 1 single left, and in that last one work a single crochet. And that's the end of the row. You can cut your yarn, open up, and then that brings us to the end of row 16. Turn your work for row 17. Row 17, you have the wrong side of your work facing, so this is the wrong side, and then you're going to repeat row 15. And row 15 is this row here in the light purple, that row. Going to repeat that with color E, so that here's a dark purple color, for this kit at least. So row 17 is a repetition of row 15. And I'm purposefully not going to show you stitch by stitch how to work this row, because I want to encourage you to use the written pattern for this. So use the written pattern so you can also really start to learn to read the written patterns. If it's still a little difficult for you, go back to the video for row 15, because it's exactly the same way. Going to attach here in the first stitch and then work a single crochet in the chain space, chain 1, skip this stitch and work a single crochet in the space. So repeat row 15 using color E with the wrong side facing. Row 18 is a repetition of row 16, and that's the row here in the light pink. So this row in the light pink, that's row 16. Repeat this with a new color, and the color you're going to use is color D. So for row 18, repeat row 16 with color D. For row 19, you're again going to repeat row 15, but this time in color A. You can see I've already worked this row. This is the last time we're going to work this row in only one color, and next rows we're going to be using the same color for 2 rows. But for now, work row 19, again a repetition of row 15 in color A. Row 20, you have the right side facing, and with color C, going to work a row that's very similar to what we've done before. I'm going to show you this row again because we're not going to be cutting our yarn at the end of the row. So in that sense, this row is different. In the first stitch, so with the right side facing, starting when you finish the previous row, attach color C with a slip stitch, chain 1 and a single crochet in the first stitch, pulling my yarn tails, chain 1, skipping the first stitch, work a single crochet in the next chain space, and you're going to repeat this until you're to the other side. And I'll show you the last 2 stitches as well. But this row is basically the same as what we've done before, with the only difference is that you do not cut your yarn at the end. So repeat single crochet, chain 1 and a single crochet in the chain spaces until you're to the end. Just the last few stitches on row 20. Going to finish with a chain 1, so you need to work the repeat one more time. In the last chain space, work a single, chain 1, going to skip this single crochet, and then in the very last one, very last stitch, work a single. And now we've finished with row 20, and it's important to leave your yarn attached because in the next row we're going to be using the same color. Row 21. Very similar to rows we've done before. The difference is your yarn is now attached already. So you have the wrong side of your work facing. Start with a chain 1, which as usual is not a stitch. So in this first position, I'm going to work the first single crochet. In the chain space, work a single, chain 1, skip the single crochet, then come to the next chain space and work a single in here. You can see that this gives a different look because you're working 2 rows in the same color, but this is the same stitches as we've done up till now. So chain 1, single crochet, and in the chain space work single crochet. You're going to repeat this until you're to the other side. And you get a different look here because you're working. Yeah, you're not going to get. You'll see when we've worked a few rows that your look and feel is slightly different, although we're using the same stitches, and that's actually what these rows are going to illustrate. So continue with a single crochet, chain 1, skip the stitch, and then all the single crochets are again in the chain 1 spaces. Almost at the end of the row, just want to show you the last few stitches. So I've just worked the single crochet, so that's chain 1, skip the single, in the chain 1 space, work a single crochet, and on the very last stitch, work a single. And then you've completed the row, and at this point you can cut your yarn. So you can cut your yarn and open up the loop. Then that completes row 21. For rows 22 and 23, those are these 2 rows here. I've already worked them. You're going to repeat rows 20 and 21. So these two here, where we work the 2 rows in one color, going to do that a second time. And the color that you're going to use for that is color F. So it's exactly the same, just with a different color. Again, I want to encourage you to use the written pattern for these 2 rows, because you've already done them once, and then if you then look at the pattern, you can also see how the stitches are worked versus how it's written down, because that's an important skill to have. So repeat rows 20 and 21 with color F. Rows 24 and 25 is the same idea. You're going to repeat rows 20 and 21. So you see you've now you've done them twice already. You're going to do it repeat a third time, and this time you're going to use color B. And you can see how you're getting a different stitch pattern than you did before. So repeat rows 20 and 21, but in color B for rows 24 and 25. Rows 26 and 27, I've worked them here in the purple, is again a repetition of rows 20 and 21. This is your last repetition that we're working this way. So repeat rows 20 and 21 last time with color D. Row 28, going to use color A, and we're going to attach in the first stitch with a slip stitch. You have the right side facing, and this row is actually a repetition of row 20, but we're going to come back in a different way. So in the first stitch, attach with a slip stitch and chain 1, and then in that first stitch work a single, and then pull all your yarn tails just to get everything nice and neat again. Chain 1, skipping the first stitch, come to the chain space here, and of course work a single, and repeat this until you're to the other side. And this is the last row that we're working this stitch pattern. So work 1 single crochet, chain 1, another single crochet, and all the singles are again still in the chain spaces. So continue till you're to the other side. Last few stitches of row 28 already, and you're going to finish this row as you've done so many rows before. Skipping the second last stitch, and then on the last stitch here work a single crochet, skipping that chain 1. Leave your yarn attached for the last row of this part. Row 29, you have the wrong side of your work facing, and we're going to start by changing hook sizes. So you're going to remove the 6.5mm hook that you had on your work, and you're going to change back to your 5mm hook for the last row. Chain 1, which again does not count as a stitch, and then in the first single here work a single crochet. And now we're going to work a single crochet in every single crochet in every chain space. Here's the chain space, work a single in there, and then the single crochet, work a single. So on every stitch work a single crochet. And then this is the final round, and at the end of this row you should have again 145 single crochets. So in every stitch, every single and every chain space work a single until you're to the end of the row. Final stitches of this row, just continue. Work a single crochet on every stitch and every chain space. This is the last chain space, and then a single crochet here on the very last stitch. You can cut your yarn and pull through to fasten off, and and then you've finished this part. There you go. And now, of course, yarn tails. Let's have a look at how to work away yarn tails with this type of stitch pattern. Yarn tails, as usual, there are quite a few of them, and I'd like to take a look at these yarn tails, because there are actually quite a few things happening here. Because in part one we had quite a substantial amount of fabric to work into, but now, especially here, you only have like a few, the stitches are small, so you don't have a lot of room to work into. So I'd like to show you how to deal with that, and in essence it's still the same idea. Work a yarn tail away in the color that belongs to that yarn tail. So I'm just going to swap my work around so I have the wrong side facing, and I'm going to take a yarn tail. Now let's take this pink one here. I'm just going to zoom in a bit so you can see it better. So this is the wrong side of my work, and I'm going to take this pink yarn tail here, thread it on my needle. Now the idea is still the same. You want to stay into the stitches of the color that you're working with. So I've got the pink here. Let me just pull that purple stitch the other way. There we go. So I'm going to thread through the top of these pink stitches. You can see I'm actually going to push through the top part only, and I'm specifically here just going to work underneath these loops. And again, if you look at it from the front, so that's here, you can't see the needle. That means you won't be able to see the yarn either. I'm just going to work underneath those stitches. So I'm at the top of the pink stitches underneath the dark purple. And then I'm going to pull out the needle. And then I'm going to come back, just like before. Push through. And then a third time. If my yarn tail is long enough, I might just have cut this a bit too short. Actually, I see it's very short, but I think I'll get a third turn in there. Yeah, just about. Well, not completely. I'm going to thread this in here because I actually do want that third turn. So don't cut your yarn tails too short, because that actually makes it difficult to work them away. So make sure that your yarn tails are long enough. And then of course now my yarn's splitty and it doesn't want to go on my needle anymore, and all of those practical problems. I'm just going to pull it through, see how far it comes, and pull. This is a bit of a mess, but don't worry about that. I'm going to cut them off either side. It's not going to go anywhere. Just going to cut this one here and that one there. There we go. Now if I just pull this open a bit, and if I look at it from the front, you can see that you cannot see the yarn underneath these stitches. Because remember, it's underneath these dark purple stitches there. Maybe there a little bit you can see, but not much. And if you look at it from a distance, you won't be able to see it at all. So by working into the top of the stitch, you actually work it away the best, because you've got the most fabric there to work into. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to repeat this process for all these other stitches as well. For example, this one here. I'll just quickly show you the first part. And then you do the same for all of these. I'm just going to come up into the top of the stitch. And now I can work into the top here again, sticking to the thicker part of the stitch. And again from the front, I've worked it there, but really you can't see anything at all, and that's exactly what you're going for. So take your time on these tails. It's quite a few of them this week, and of course here you have the thicker fabric anyway, so this will be easier to work into. But especially here you have these single rows. Really take care with that, because if you work them away neatly, it's really going to help for the quality of your work. So work away all these yarn tails, and then I'd like to look at size. So if you just quickly take a look at size, your blanket's length is still the same. This is still 125 centimeters, and the width of your blanket has now grown to about 24 centimeters, give or take. So that's the gauge that I'm working to, 24 centimeters wide and 125 centimeters long, which is unchanged. One thing that you may notice from your blanket, if I just push it forward, is if you look at the edge, you may notice, that depends, that the stitches that you've worked this week, they just pull in a little bit. You see this edge isn't as straight as it was in part 1. They just pull in a little bit, and that's almost inevitable with this type of stitch. So if you pull it out, you'll see, oh, you can easily straighten this line out again, but it'll tend to pull in a bit again. And that has to do with all these chain stitches that we worked, because chain stitches are slightly smaller than the single crochet stitches. And that's also the reason why we actually went up a hook size, actually quite a few hook sizes, because to compensate for these chain stitches being slightly smaller. And if you were able to control your tension reasonably, this will be not too bad. Like I said, I just give it a little tug and then it's straight again. But if you really struggle with tension, you might have, that really makes a gap here, then I suggest you go even up a hook size more to get this to the right tension. But that's what we're going for this week, is to at least get this line as straight as we possibly can. And if you look at size, you're about 125 centimeters wide, and your length is unchanged at 125.